One of the problems is that the government itself has engaged in so much discrimination that it's difficult, even at this late date, to measure employer discrimination. That is, if the government has provided substandard education, for example, for 12 years, whatever number of years someone's in school, and then he goes into the labor market with this substandard education, it's very hard then to compare him to someone who's gotten a better education in the same number of years to figure out how much of the differential is due to the quality of the education. Mm-hmm. That's a tough problem. I think there's some indication of this in the fact that the older blacks earn a lower percentage of the income of whites of their own age than do the younger blacks, indicating in part the fact that the older blacks were educated in an era when the education was poor in the black schools, and also where the job opportunities were lower, and therefore they had less experience.
So that there would be a greater differential between, say, the 45-year-old black and the 45-year-old Jew than between the 20-year-old black and the 20-year-old Jew.
Yes. And with other groups as well. With Puerto Ricans, for example, Puerto Ricans around 18 to 24 earn about 3% higher than the national average, but Puerto Ricans around 50 earn substantially less.
Mm-hmm. What would be the legitimate and what would be the illegitimate deductions that an observer might make from the fact that America is, roughly speaking, 50% women, feminine, and yet there's only a single woman senator in Congress? What would be a legitimate, what would be an illegitimate deduction to make from that?
Well, as I look at numbers
paradox
from various places around the world, I don't find anything faintly resembling an even representation of people in any institution anywhere in the world, broken down in any way. There's been a recent study of military forces around the world in which they can find no country in which the military force represents even approximately the ethnic composition of the society. Sometimes the poorer groups are overrepresented, sometimes underrepresented. There are all kinds of factors there. Well, what's amazing to me is that this notion that people would be evenly represented except for these institutional policies, that notion has had such momentum behind it without a speck of evidence being asked or presented.
Well, what about, so let's say you find 11% of a country is Indian, but only 1% vote, but 50% is white and 40% vote. Do you draw any deductions from that disparity?
I find that some people have different views on the importance of voting. But I find that throughout the world. If you look at Malaysia, for example, the Chinese are the large minority there, about a third or more of the Malaysian population. They're evenly represented in the colleges. The Chinese are outnumbered 3 to 1 by the Malays in liberal arts. They outnumber the Malays 8 to 1 in science and 15 to 1 in engineering. If you look at Asians in the United States who get PhDs, and here we talk about a select group, you find that they're outnumbered about 3 to 1 by Hispanics who get PhDs in history, but they outnumber the Hispanics 10 to 1 in chemistry. That nowhere do I find this even spread of people that you look for. And I think the reason is very simple, that human beings are not random events.
Well,
that we all have histories, and there are values that come out of those histories, and we have things that we want to do and things that we don't want to do.
Well, are these genetic implications or purely cultural implications?
I would think cultural. I know myself when I was struggling in late teens, looking for work, it never occurred to me to become a policeman. It never occurred to me to become a policeman. There are other people, I'm sure, who would have occurred to immediately. I never thought of that. That was not something that I did. And I knew there were black policemen. I delivered groceries to one, so I knew that there were jobs there. It just was not something that I was led toward.
Well, I think it's one thing for us all to accept individual inclinations, but to accept group inclinations is, or should be, a little bit more difficult, shouldn't it? For you to say, I, Tom Sowell, was not interested in being a policeman is very different from saying blacks on the whole are uninterested in being
It's tougher to demonstrate in the case of a group. But what I'm saying is the contrary thesis, namely that all groups would be evenly represented everywhere if allowed to follow their own bent without any institutional barriers. That is what I find amazing, because even if you look at activities totally within their own control, what television programs to watch and so on, there's a whole sub-industry of studying the demographic composition of television audiences. simply because they found that the people, who watch NFL Monday Night Football are not the same people who watch Meet the Press or McNeil Lehrer. And the advertisers want to know who are those people, because they don't want to be selling lingerie to the people who are watching Monday Night Football, and they don't want to waste their product dollar, their advertising dollar. And they find there are very substantial differences, even in things that are totally within the control of the individual.
Now, are those differences value-free on the whole, or not value-free?
I'm not sure what you mean by value-free.
Well, nobody can blame a man for being uninterested in wearing lingerie, but you could blame a man, let us say, who would not permit or would not invite a woman to share the experience of a football game on the grounds that it's not appropriate.
I suppose so. I never really thought of it. I'm not sure why there's a value problem involved at all if you're talking about what people choose to do themselves, as distinguished from what they try to prevent other people from doing.
See, I'm leading back now to the question of why is there a single woman in the Senate, although half of Americans are women, and I guess I'm asking you whether this is a transcription of implicit anti-feminine values in this society.
Well, in a country where I think just over half the people are women, that if they wanted to fill the Senate with women, they could very well do it.
Well, it may very well be that they take on the prejudices of men.
All sorts of things are possible. It's also possible that there are other reasons why women don't choose to get into positions like politics, because they have a set of demands which are very tough for most women to meet, and at the same time do the other things that most women do, such as raise children and so on.
That's what I was inviting you to speculate on.
Yes, I know that just from my own case, I've been invited to be involved in politics and electorally and otherwise, and given the values that I have, there's just simply no way that those two things can go together. That what I would have to give up in terms of my personal life would just not be worth it to me. I suspect that that's probably true for a lot of women. When I did a study of academic women, I found that women who do follow academic careers, get their PhDs and so on, have much lower rates of marriage than either non-academic women or academic men, and much higher rates of divorce among the few who do get married. Apparently there must be a great deal of stress in that. And just from people that I know, I can see where there is a great deal of stress in trying to have two people following their career when one is expected around the home to provide all the housewifely services in addition to writing those articles and books. It gets to be a little much.
So you would dismiss as thoughtless any complaint against a society that had only one woman in the Senate, or only 11% blacks in Congress, or only 6% Jews, or whatever.
I wouldn't dismiss it. I would simply say, if there is evidence that you have, let us see that evidence. What I think is really tragic is that assertions have been made not only without evidence being offered, but without anyone even asking for evidence. It's as if these are self-evident truths that have been brought down from the mountainside.
So the thing to do is to look for non-invidious explanations.
No, the thing to do is look for whatever seems to be the most reasonable explanation in the circumstance. And I'm saying that the people who've made the case the other way, or who've acted as if they made the case, typically have not felt the necessity even to bring evidence. They say there's one woman in the Senate, therefore. Or they say that women make X percent of the income of men without bothering to find out what percentage of those women are working part-time, what percentage of them are re-entering the labor force after 20 years of having children, etc. Rather than saying, let us compare now women who chose to stay in the labor force continuously since high school, on into their 30s, let's say, compared to men who did, and see how do they compare. And there, these great differences tend to disappear. In some cases, the women make more.
Well, but you seem substantially to have eliminated invidious explanations. For instance, when you write, how far have we come in removing discriminatory pay differences among individuals with the same qualifications and different racial or ethnic backgrounds? Among the younger generation, we have just about all the way. This is you.
Yes.
Now, this would suggest that you have satisfied yourself that there are no invidious standards that inhibit minority ethnics from...
No, you'll never reach the point where there are no invidious standards, because there will always...
That critically affect.
Oh, I'm saying that if you're trying to explain pay differences, that's not an explanation that will stand up to a closer look at the data. And that's true not only in the United States, incidentally, it's also true in other parts of the world, that if you look at, again, go back to Chinese and Malaysia. In Malaysia, the Malays are the dominant force, not only numerically, but politically. They control the government, and so on.
In fact, they have anti-Chinese laws. Don't
Oh, they do. Yeah. So there's no question whether Chinese are discriminating against the Malaysia. I mean, all you have to do is read the books, the statute books, and they tell you there's no two ways about it. The fact of the matter is the Chinese make double the income of the average Malay. So the question is not whether people are discriminated against. The question is how effective is that discrimination, and to what extent does it explain income differences? Because many of the groups that are above the average income in the United States and in other countries are groups that have demonstrably been discriminated against in various ways.
For instance.
The Jews would be classic. The Japanese also. And the Japanese make almost 1/3 higher income than the average American. So the question is not whether there's been this interracial friction and so on. That's existed everywhere and down through history. The question is how much can you explain the income differences that way?